Okay, we're going to pick up today where we left off yesterday with the Berlin airlift. Okay, so as a reminder, Berlin was divided into how many zones of occupation? 4. And whose zone did Berlin reside in as far as the 4 zones of Germany? The Soviet Union's. Okay, very, very good. So what happens, it's kind of a little background here. The Soviet Union is going to feel threatened. Okay, the Soviet Union is going to feel threatened when the United States, Great Britain, and France combine their zones into one. So the Soviet Union is going to feel threatened when the United States, Great Britain, and France combine their 3 zones into one. So no longer is it 4 zones of Germany or 4 zones of Berlin. It's 1 and 1, right? The democratic side between France, Great Britain, and the United States, and the communist side, the Soviet Union. So you have West and East Germany, and you have West and East Berlin. That's how you officially get the 2 divisions there, the division there in each aspect. Because Stalin is threatened, he is going to cut off road access into West Berlin. Because Stalin is threatened, he is going to cut off road access to West Berlin. Why is he able to do that? Because he has he owns the zone that is surrounding the city of Berlin. Okay, so he can't create roadblocks in West Berlin, but he can create roadblocks in East Germany that you would have to go through to get to West Berlin. Okay, at least by car. So his intention is to starve the West Berliners. His intention is to starve the West Berliners and force them to turn to him for help. Okay, he wants to force them into turning to him for help. And here's what I mean by that. When I taught you that the other Allied powers are controlling different zones of Germany and different zones of Berlin, that means each of those zones is their responsibility to rebuild and to also provide supplies for, since they are kind of left in economic chaos after the war. Does that make sense? So you're not only overseeing that zone's government, you're also making sure they have all the supplies and items they need. If the Americans, British, and French cannot access their side of West Berlin, will those West Berliners be getting the supplies they need? No. So they'll be forced to turn to Stalin for help, and then he can unite Berlin, and who would control it all? He would, okay, the Soviet Union. So that's kind of his plan, right? But of course, the Allies may not be able to get there by car, but they can get there by plane, okay, flight. Good, okay? Is that what you said? That was a good, that's a good guess, though. That's good. Okay, he really can't, because they can't go on the roads at all. Okay, so
nobody knew this either.
Shh, don't embarrass her. Okay, so the Americans and the British are going to begin an airlift They're going to be beginning an airlift, flying lots of supplies and food into West Berlin over the course of the year. Okay, they're going to fly lots of food and supplies into West Berlin over the course of the year. So they're going to be flying lots of stuff into West Berlin. So they basically resist Stalin's goal, and they counteract it. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that's just common sense. Why is this important? Okay. The amount of planes, I have the statistics somewhere else, but the amount of planes that the other allies used during this time is countless. I mean, there's like dozens of flights made a day. So they obviously pour a lot as far as the plane use and the gas it takes to fly the planes. They put a lot into this to ensure the West Berliners are taken care of. And the West Berliners, are they going to be appreciative of that? Yes. So this just helps America and Britain look good to West Germany and to West Berlin. Okay, it just improves their reputation in Germany. Okay, so then we're going to have a little bit of cause and effect for the next two things. And then the next thing is going to be NATO. Okay, and NATO, on your outline, it stands for what? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Very good. Okay, so NATO is formed as a result of the Soviet blockade in Germany. Okay, NATO is created as a result of the Soviet blockade in Germany. It was a collective security alliance. It was a collective security alliance between the United States, Canada, and several Western European countries. Between the United States, Canada, and several Western European countries. And they form as a defense against Soviet aggression. They form this as a defense against Soviet aggression. So what I mean here is the blockade, that was not an attack by the Soviet Union. It was very, very passive aggressive. Okay, it was a way for them to, make a jab at the US and Britain and France, but it wasn't a formal attack where they're using soldiers or firing weapons or anything like that. But they feel now that there's some tension in the air clearly. So if Stalin were to make an actual move where he were to attack any of the countries that signed the agreement in NATO, they would all be on board to going to war against the Soviet Union. So we are definitely out of the isolationist period. We're prepared to do battle again if Stalin makes a move. So Stalin will also be threatened by this creation, so he's going to turn around and create his own organization. What's that organization called? The Warsaw Pact, okay? And the Warsaw Pact is the Soviet Union's response to NATO. The Soviet Union's response to NATO. And it's the same type of alliance, but between the Soviet Union and its satellite nations. Same type of alliance, but between the Soviet Union and its satellite nations. So, for example, the nations right to the west of the Soviet Union. And Warsaw is in what country? Poland. So that is where this thing was kind of signed and agreed upon. Okay, so you really do have Western Europe and Eastern Europe kind of ganged up against each other now. Like, they're in teams. They're prepared. It's just more and more we're on the brink of war, but it's never actually going to happen. Now, while war does not happen between the Soviet Union and the United States, war does happen elsewhere, and there are several battles that are considered part of the Cold War. And that's the next three things in your outline I want to talk about very briefly. Okay, and that's China, the Korean War, and the war in Vietnam. Especially the last one, I won't be going into hardly any detail with that because we're going to have a whole unit on the war in Vietnam since we were so heavily involved in it. And that'll be later. But we'll start talking about China first. And there are some names I'm going to write on the board for y'all since y'all can't see me PowerPoint. Okay. In China, there was a civil war between the communists under, anyone remember the original communist leader in China? You learned about him freshman year. Mao Zedong. Okay, so there was a civil war between communists under leader Mao Zedong and the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. Okay? And I have both of those names on the PowerPoint. So, communists under Mao Zedong versus the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, Kai-shek being the last name. And nationalist means like democratic leader. Okay, he was democratically elected by the nation of China. Okay? The kicker is that Kai-shek was not very nice. He was actually very corrupt and a very ruthless leader. But because he's the nationalist leader and not the communist leader, who is the United States going to show open support for? Not the nationalist, Kai-shek. Okay, so I want you to know that the U.S. shows open support for Kai-shek. The U.S. shows open support for Kai-shek because he wasn't communist. We gave lots of money to the nationalists in China. We gave lots of money to the nationalists in China in hopes that they would stop communism from happening. In hopes that they would stop and prevent communism from happening and taking a hold of China. Okay. And by the way, what is that policy known as where we said we will give money to those countries who are at risk of falling to communism? Truman Doctrine. Very good. Okay. So that's a direct example of what the Truman Doctrine was. Okay, well, the money is not going to work. Okay, because China will fall to communism. So that's money we lost, unfortunately. Okay, China does fall to communism. So was containment successful in this conflict? No, because it spreads beyond where it already existed. Does that make sense? It has spread to China now. So what I want you to kind of understand here is that as far as this civil war in China, our military wasn't involved in it, but we were involved because we were helping to finance one side in hopes that it wouldn't fall to communism. Yes? Okay. The next war is one we will get a little more involved in because we're actually going to have some troops be sent to Korea. So several of you probably have veterans in your family. If they were not in the World War II era, they may have been in the Korean era, which is early 50s. Okay, so the Korean War. And when I go into this, it's kind of important to understand because y'all don't have the map, unfortunately, on here. But y'all can always Google it to look. Korea before this Korean War was not North and South Korea. Okay, there used to be one Korea, right? And I'll explain how it got divided because is it divided today? Yes, hence why we talk about our enemies in North Korea, not in South Korea. Okay? So, I want you to know that Korea had been conquered by Japan during World War II. Korea had been conquered by Japan during World War II. So the side effect of that is when the Allies win the war, the Allies are also going to split up Korea into zones of occupation to oversee that rebuilding. And it's just going to be divided into two this time, not four, just two. The Soviet Union and the United States. And who gets what piece of it? You could probably guess. We get the South, and the Soviet Union is going to get the North. Very good. So the Soviet Union was responsible for the north part of Korea. The Soviet Union was responsible for the northern part of Korea, and the United States was responsible for occupying the south. And it was divided at the 38th parallel. Okay? It was divided at the 38th parallel. So you could imagine, what is the Soviet Union going to push on North Korea? Communism. Okay? So the North Koreans will be influenced by communism, where the South Koreans will be influenced by democracy. So it's kind of two different Koreas now. That's when we're kind of setting up the process. A few years later, when the Soviets and the Americans withdraw their troops from Korea, when the Soviets and Americans withdraw their troops from Korea, North Korea invades South Korea. North Korea invades South Korea in an effort to reunite the country. Under communism. Okay, in an effort to reunite the country under communism. So, because our policy of containment happens kind of after the Soviets were already occupying North Korea, we were not that concerned with going into North Korea and trying to force it to be a democracy. But we were concerned with not allowing communism to spread into our zone of influence, which was South Korea. Does that make sense? So when we leave and that invasion occurs, our response is, it's time to send in troops. So, troops are sent in to South Korea. Troops are sent in to South Korea in order to defend it from communism. In order to defend it from communism. When I say troops, I am mostly talking about American troops, but I believe the United Nations also sent some troops in. But a well-known name was set with the leadership role as far as running the troops in the in South Korea, and that's who? What is our Pacific general? Who is in the Philippines and Japan? MacArthur. Okay, so MacArthur is given the responsibility. Okay, and MacArthur just is M-A-C-A. Okay, so MacArthur was in charge of these troops. A few years later, a stalemate was reached. What happens in a stalemate? Does anyone really get anything? No, it kind of ends up kind of where we started. No one really makes a lot of gains. So, Korea would remain, I should say. Korea would remain divided at the 38th parallel. Okay? And is it still that way today? Yes. Okay, so to this day, Korea is still divided at the 38th parallel because no real progress was made in this war as far as the North conquering more of the South or the South conquering more of the North. So would you argue that in this example, the United States was successful in its policy of containment? Technically, yes, because our goal was to not allow it to spread any farther, right? And we did not, because it remained, South Korea remained democratic. Now, completely on a side note, you do not have to write this down, but at this point, this is where Douglas MacArthur's reputation starts going down a little bit, because he goes to President Truman, who's the president at the time, and says, "All right, Truman, it is time to invade China." And I don't have the map to show y'all on the board here, but China is connected to Korea. Like, Korea, north and south, is kind of a peninsula that branches off of China. And remember, is China communist right now? Yes. So Douglas MacArthur blamed the Chinese for influencing North Korea and encouraging them to spread and push communism a little more south. So MacArthur says, it's time to invade China. And Truman says, we're not invading China. Not going to happen, not doing it. And MacArthur pushes and pushes on the issue. And eventually, Truman says, you're fired because you're being insubordinate and you're not getting the picture. So unfortunately, MacArthur does not live on his name as a U.S. general any longer after this issue, even though he was at first seen as a hero of the Korean War. Okay, and then the last note is going to be quickly about the war in Vietnam, the Vietnam War. And I really just want to introduce this to you. I just want to say that this was another war that resulted from the U.S. policy of containment. Another war that resulted from the U.S. policy of containment. And there's so many notes about the Vietnam War, but it doesn't really happen predominantly in the 50s, so we're going to hold off and learn about this more so for the next unit. Okay? Actually 2 units from now. So just be aware, and I really want you to be aware that all 3 of these conflicts, while there was no direct fighting in the Cold War, there was direct fighting in these conflicts, and they are technically part of the scope that is the Cold War. Any questions?